Exceptional Randos show is produced live in Sunroom Studios' Base Capsule and in partnership with KLST 103.5, RadioCallisti.org. Remember to catch our Exceptional Randos live stream on YouTube every Sunday between 2 and 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And if you have a story, idea, or question that you would like to share, we want to hear from you. Thanks for listening.
Well, that was random.
Exceptional Radio. Hey, good afternoon. It is the 30th. Oh man, it's like a pretty big day. Or like, isn't it like the eve of everyone put on their crazy costume day and go rot their teeth day?
I thought they did that yesterday, though.
Was that yesterday officially?
I mean, I thought so.
And I mean, I know they can have like the official city expression of holidays and stuff like that, but like, isn't tomorrow the night?
I mean,
technically,
it's government name, but I'm pretty sure everybody actually celebrated it yesterday.
Can't wait to rot their teeth day.
But maybe I'm wrong. I don't know.
Shit, maybe that's like a loophole. Kids get to rot their teeth twice in 1 month, like officially and unofficially.
If it doesn't fall on a Saturday or on a Friday.
So I was reading that stores are now stocking seasonal stuff like, months in advance to help people to prevent like surges in buying so that they can maintain proper inventory so that, they're not just like wiped out and then screwed with no incoming inventory for the next 2 weeks. And so this has been going on for past couple of years, preceding pandemic. And then, so now it's like in full swing where you can get Halloween candy like 2 months in advance. You can get Easter candy 2 months in advance. You can get all your St. Patrick's Day stuff way in advance now. Everything's is available in advance. In some places, and then there are some stores, of course, that cater to these kinds of things. And they'll just have an entire St. Patrick's Day section that's available all year round. But you got to be in like a city for that.
I feel like that's the final stage of a tradition breaking down.
Yeah, seriously, this is like the final form of peak capitalism. It only gets like, decrepit and breaks down and derelict from here. I mean, can it actually get worse than year-round St. Patrick's Day? I'm not trying to pick on St. Patrick's Day. Actually, I kind of enjoy it because there's always like a sale on corned beef. But or Easter or any of the big moneymaker holidays where there's like a significant push to tool up and dress up and do all the things, go cosplay as whatever because it's your someone's license to publicly drink their mind out and act like fools. It's definitely not limited to St. Patrick's Day. There's like all manner of holidays that people go out, spend ridiculous amounts of money and like wreck their boat. I think 4th of July is a big boat wrecking holiday.
Yeah, I think part of it too is like when there's too many people on the water and you can't actually drive a boat the way people want to drive it, especially when they start ingesting alcohol.
Which is illegal.
Right, it's super illegal, but I think people do it because they're like, oh, we're on water. It's like, you can't run off the road, but you can totally still get in accidents and shit. So, yeah, people are not smart. If they didn't do it, they wouldn't have had to made it illegal in the first place.
There's so many laws that should be on. Well, there's so many gray areas. Like, you can drive vehicles on frozen lakes as long as there's an access point. There aren't many laws. Like you have to. I mean, there have to be specific. I think because they're like our state is divided up into like regions. Each one has their own like kind of autonomy about off-road recreation and or the use of off-road vehicles at all. And some of them I think have to be really specific. I'm pretty sure that's how it is everywhere because when I read about places like Utah or Colorado, those places seem to be like free range for people just to drive anywhere, and it's crazy. But,
Well, at the same time, like I imagine in the middle of winter in Colorado, the ice is going to be way thicker than it's in Indiana anywhere. And I think like once it's a certain thickness, it'll be able to take the weight of a vehicle. But it's like the idea that any frozen body of water could support a vehicle, no matter how thick the ice is like fucking insane.
I mean,
that's really absurd.
I mean, that's the scary part. It's like I've seen people taking their like snowmobiles on frozen bodies of water, and I've seen people take their truck on a frozen body of water, dragging freaking ice fishing sheds. These things are just a fucking truck. Like when I watch videos like last year, there was a bunch of guys who had all their ice sheds on a chunk of ice that broke free from the main body that was attached to land, and there was this whole fiasco about getting them off of this thing, and they had to get a lot of boats involved, but they had to get those ice shelters out there somehow, and they used trucks, like freaking 5,000, 6,000 pound vehicles to drag shit out into an ice sheet. That's insane to me. Just completely, that's like madness.
Yeah. It's a death wish. I couldn't, there's times when you realize that some people are just out to feel something, and it doesn't matter if they die in the process because they're like devoid of feeling, and you're like, oh shit, I do not want to get caught in this person's like fallout, because they'll be willing to just drive a snowmobile on ice for fucking some spark of feeling. And you're like, if you don't have any other voice, it may be like, maybe I'm just, too reserved and too conservative, and I'm the idiot for not having fun driving on ice. But you're like, in reality,
man. Like that person's they're only lucky that they didn't die.
Yeah.
That's it.
Man.
They just got lucky. They got. I mean, maybe they went and took like a sample, like drilled a hole and measured the thickness of the ice and the temperatures are sufficiently cold, and all the physics lines up in their favor, and they're like sciencing the shit out of it, and they still just get lucky that they don't fucking die. And we're like getting we're on the threshold of the cold months. Here in a couple of months it's going to be freezing temperatures all day long. I wonder how much like we've had like a pretty decent year. I think the rains have been kind of inconsistent, which leads me to the suspicion that we're gonna have a complicated winter. We're gonna have a complicated fall.
I'm okay with like if it stays like this through December into January, I'm cool with that.
Yeah, me too. If it just rains periodically,
it could happen.
Yeah,
because it's like we're going into November, and there's been some times when we've had snow in October. So if we can make it, if we made it through October with no snow, I think it's very possible that it could be a mild winter, at least through December. I mean, I'm hoping, obviously, but it just seems like because of the irregularity of the rain, I feel like those seasons
Yeah, I think fall
tend
needs
to
to be like divided into like early fall and prime fall.
yeah. Well, and that's if it has two parts. Sometimes it doesn't, and then it's like really short, and then it
Yeah.
just goes straight into winter. So that's what I mean. Like, if we can get this like extended fall where all the leaves are off the trees, but it's just rainy and wet and not actually snowy. I prefer that very much to snow
I
in
think that's
December.
I think that's called a California winter.
Right.
Because
Is
they're
that what
lucky
they
if
call
they.
them?
I mean, I'm pretty sure it's like doesn't really. It only snows in the mountains in California, like in the Sierra Nevadas and maybe up
Holy
in Southern
shit.
California.
So it's supposed to get up to 70 on Wednesday and 75 on Thursday. And then 74 through the 6th. So if this like, whoa, are you serious? So if this whole, wait, that's October. Okay, that makes more sense. But even if it holds, it's still saying it's going to be like 47 into early December if this forecast holds, which is where it seems like a mild winter that they're predicting. So I'm down with that. It's even like 40 in through February. So average high 40, 41, what they're predicting. Which obviously this far out, it's a crapshoot, but these numbers do seem in line with some of the winters I've experienced in the past. So
Yeah, the 10-day that I'm looking at never gets below 46. Nope, 45. Next Wednesday is the low. The lowest next week. Yeah, 4 days, 5 days, 6 days in the 70s.
well, and then it looks like it doesn't actually hit freezing until the 23rd based on this, and that's like at night. So
And that's basically like, almost a month away.
right. Well, and the issue is like if it doesn't get too far below freezing, a lot of the foliage might not die. And so we won't have like a brown winter.
Yeah, but that means we have like crazy bug situation in the spring.
True. That's true.
If we don't get that really cold, hard
I've
frost.
already actually there's already fewer mosquitoes though. They're still around, but they've already started to be fewer and far between.
You're right. There was like a couple days, maybe 3 or 4 days, where it got really cold last week, and I noticed like no bug activity like immediately because it got pretty cold pretty quick, and then the other day it was kind of warm out, and I noticed there was a spider that was trying to form a web, and it was the most pathetic web, and I'm pretty sure that spider was like dead by the end of the night because it got cold again. And I'm pretty sure that's like par for the course for most insects. It gets just warm enough that they're like, oh, I better go grab something to eat. And then, it's a trap.
Yeah, and actually now that you pointed out, I do base my seasonal predictions off the appearance and frequency of animals. So like, for example, the chipmunks haven't been out for a while, and like they usually come out when it gets like close to really cold, and then they go away for a while, and then they'll be out frequently if it's really warm, but they've been gone for like a week now, and then hummingbird randomly popped up last week because they disappeared for like a week or two, and then one randomly popped up, and then they haven't been back. So I imagine they've already migrated, like, and then like I haven't seen any ducks over at the pond, so I think they've already gone. And it's
Well,
like
the local ducks have.
Right, but I mean, there's like a seasonal shift in birds where you're like, oh, we're in the winter crew now. Like, there's a lot more crows over here during winter. Like, they don't ever really go away, but around fall and winter is when a shitload of crows come through, and like they use this area to migrate through, and that hasn't quite happened yet. So I don't think we're at the actual winter shift quite yet, if we even get a full one. So that's where I'm like, you know, because the birds can, obviously they're not like calculating in the same conscious way as us as far as we know, but it's probably even better that they're not consciously calculating the weather patterns and are going naturally. So if there's like an irregular,
We are right on at the beginning of the southern zone duck season in Indiana. November 5 is when it begins. For central Indiana, it began in October 29th, and then in the north, it was the 22nd.
makes sense.
So yeah,
Makes sense.
they just started moving south in the last week.
Yep. Because there's a pond, you know, it's like a block away from us where they are usually, there's at least a couple flocks, and then you can tell when they start to disappear. So,
Well, it means
'cause then-
that there might be snow geese working their way south, and Canada geese, and there's some other geese that migrate through Indiana. I think there's like 5 or 6 different type of geese, or maybe it's duck that come through here. And there's like 4. There's a bunch of animals, migratory birds. The Canadian geese are the ones you worry about. They're the really vicious ones. Bastards.
yeah, they are very vicious, which is where
Fucking mean sons of bitches. Like,
I remember when I was a kid, there was like a grocery store near our house, and it had a pond, and the Canadian geese would like come in there, and like people would go and feed them, not realizing how vicious they were. And then the geese would start like going after them. And it was like funny to them at first, but then they would like actually start getting bit, and kids were getting bit. And it was like, it would go from 0 to 60 real quick. And you're like, oh shit. A grown man has to fight a fucking goose because his son just got bit, and he's got to defend his family and shit now. And
So-
the goose is not backing down. Now there's like a few of them.
the Canadian
They
goose
might win.
is like 100% example of why we don't need to resurrect dinosaurs.
Yeah, because it looks like you're gonna be, oh, this is a swan fucking cool experience, but nah, you better not get close to that thing because it's gonna probably fuck with you.
Like, imagine a swan with, instead of like a beak, it had a mouthful of like razor sharp teeth, and had talons that were like razor blades, and
And a fucking attitude to go with it.
yeah, like, oh man, that's not the kind of thing we need to have at public parks or lakes.
No.
A little,
Especially with kids around, because they're bigger than children in the sense of like, yeah, again, I think the kid, he must have been like 4 or 5, but it's like that thing was like biting down at the kid, and you're like, no, this is not a fair fight. This kid's about to, not only this kid's about to lose, but the dad might lose too, because it's like the geese don't play fair, and fucking, I think it was like, it was about to be like 3-on-1 or some shit, but he got his kid and got the fuck out of there.
Like a turkey with a mouthful of teeth instead of a beak. That'd be pretty terrifying. A chicken with a mouthful of teeth, because that's what dinosaurs kind of, at least the interesting ones, like I guess those are the ones that are dangerous. I'm sure that they could bring back some kind of like herbivore that might be interesting and keep it small, but that's really fucked up too. I'm pretty sure the genomes for birds are much easier to like turn back on the traits for like teeth and tail and scales and lose the beak type stuff. I'm pretty sure that's a lot easier to do than turn a sheep back into a
bird with human teeth would be fucked up. Yeah.
That's a straight up Looney Tunes type stuff, maybe. Like Daffy with dentures.
Or if they were like proportional, like a duck that had like little baby teeth, and they were like come up and smile and shit. Like, yeah, that's that shit would be fucking weird. Because there's been fish with human teeth where you're like, I don't know if this is some weird mutation because of toxic waste or because of fucking evolution's weird sense of humor.
The nut busting pachu fish or whatever from like Vietnam. Those are like a giant relative of piranhas.
Yeah, looking weird as fuck. Water aliens. Yeah.
Yeah, the oceans are host to some of the weirdest critters. Like sea cucumbers. They're definitely not cucumbers.
Starfish.
Yeah, what the fuck is a starfish?
Starfish are crazy. And cuttlefish, man.
The whole cephalopod
damn
family.
near everything in the water is fucking crazy. Even like reef, like the idea of a reef is fucking pretty crazy. Yeah, I think people are not amazed enough by the things that exist because they've been too desensitized by bad science fiction and bad fantasy. And then I'm also realizing like most of Star Trek is actually fantasy and not sci-fi. And the main reason is that it's like instead of trying to base it in reality, they took like science and like took it in an unrealistic direction that sounds realistic, except they intentionally would play games concerning like, let's grab this word and put it with this one in this situation, like the
I think all
neural
fiction,
nebulizer. I mean, but this is the difference between science fiction and fantasy in that science fiction should be rooted in some sort of actual science if it's going to be considered science fiction, where fantasy, you can just be like, fairies fucking did it, and you don't have to have any sort of like scientific backing.
Well,
and that's where I think we have bad sci-fi, because it's mostly fiction.
I think there's a difference between science fiction fantasy, which is what you described, where it's a fiction that's based somewhat on some
it's
science.
Fantasy sci-fi.
Yeah. No. Fantasy science fiction is different than science fiction fantasy.
But there's magic in Star Trek, so it's like it can be either one first.
I think that when it's fantasy science fiction, then the science can be completely made up. But when you have science fiction fantasy,
it is in Star Trek. It is completely made up. That's why I think it could be either one.
But I think the distinction is that when you have science fiction fantasy, then we're anchoring ourselves in some kind of physical universe that has laws that are agreed upon beforehand.
That's true, but and that's where
it can.
I understand that distinction. But Star Trek doesn't follow it.
Yeah, no, I mean it tends to.
Doesn't.
It tends to lean more towards.
Its own.
Yeah, it says the fantasy version more than the science.
And that's what I mean. It's like you want to think it does the science fiction, but it's actually doing the fantasy most of the time. Where you're like, oh, even like the idea of like maximum warp, they fucking fuck with that shit. They change that. Every time you think it's anchored in some sort of internal consistency, they fucking change it, which is why it actually leans more towards fantasy.
Yeah,
so that's where I mean, like when you first approach Star Trek, it gives the appearance of science fiction, but the more you analyze it and the more you like realize how much they lean on magic, they lean on the existence of godlike figures that give the perception of being gods, but then they give some bullshit internal logic that they then will change later just to make it so that there is no consistent, because then you look at like the changelings popped up before they became the founders, and the first time they weren't godlike, and then when you attached the Dominion and then you give them this backstory where they've developed this culture and then they become godlike in the appearance to the Jem'Hadar, but they're actually sort of grounded in some sort of restriction. Is kind of the same as the Q continuum, but it's kind of different. But then the Q continuum, they're not quite gods either, and it's like they give this semblance of grounding it in logic that's internally consistent, but then they'll change it, and that's why it like there's nothing wrong with it, and that's where I think it was more so when I came to this realization. I think it was like getting to the end of, I think it's 6th or 7th time I've watched TNG all the way through. We're at the end of season 7. And it's like when they just like will randomly do shit, like bring back the actress that played Tasha Yar as like a Romulan in the Terran universe. Whatever, I forget exactly how they did. But
it involved the Enterprise C
and all the internal logic.
Yeah, there's an entire conflated side story that was created, like a canonical side story to explain how when Enterprise, I think it's like Enterprise Enterprise C comes back through a time vortex or something like that because they did not participate in some kind of attack. The Klingons and the Federation don't form a union, and so they send. But because Tasha reemerges on the bridge of the Enterprise, she goes back in time with the other Enterprise and provides them some kind of tactical advantage, which is total, fuck the Prime Directive, but for whatever reason, Picard allows it, and. So she goes back in time, she gets captured, turns into a Romulan sex slave, produces a child that's half Romulan who somehow rises to become Sela, the essentially the empress of the Romulan Empire, which also doesn't make any freaking sense. But that's how they brought Tasha's actress back into the story arc somehow. It's a really conflated story. They had to do a lot of hand waving and curtain magic to make it make sense, and then to give her character so much prominence. It's like she came back. She's like, "Guys, I'm really sorry I left. It was really bold of me, and I shouldn't have done it. Please let me back in. I'll even be a bad guy."
Well, it was like, what's his name? Is it Rick Behrman? I forget the guy's name. But one of the producers.
That sounds right.
Was just super fucking misogynist. And
that's why Beverly Crusher's actress, Gates McFadden left.
And then, so was, what's the name? Gene Roddenberry, for that matter.
They turned his wife into the voice of the computer.
Well, it's not even that. It's just
And then-
the way
and-
that he wanted to like. A lot of the sexual stuff was from Roddenberry himself, and it's like it sounds like he was just a perv and like a horny old man who's like, oh shit, I can like cast around boobs. Cool. I mean, it's like I don't think he was that basic as a person, but a lot of his decisions seem to be driven by his libido, which is where Behrman was even worse. And then that's where Behrman and what's her name? Gates McFadden had odds. And then Denise Crosby had odds. And then even on Deep Space Nine with I forget the chick who played
That's why Will Wheaton left.
what's her name? Dax. Whoever played Dax. She
Oh,
wanted
yeah.
more money. And he's like, no, we'll replace you with boobs. And then they replaced her. And it's like, they literally replaced her with a younger woman. So you're like, dude, they're not even ashamed about it. So something that's also
and not
meant
just
to
like
be-
not just replace her with a younger woman, but also like crushes Worf's like heart in the process. So
Yeah.
like eternally scarring one of like the coolest characters that they've been building up for over a decade.
yeah.
Bastards.
For something that was meant to be an example of the best of humankind, inadvertently it becomes the worst of like the times because it's using this utopian future as a shield for misogyny and like military industrial complex.
But Kira was
that's
in
hidden as
charge
science.
but Kira was in charge, and there was that crazy lady who was in charge of the religious faction, and like,
Well, it's like we got bait and switch thinking this is a scientific mission. By season 7, they're like displacing Native Americans that are like on a new planet and are starting 3 decades into their new civilization.
oh, that's right,
And
the
then here comes the
Cardassians show up.
Federation. Yeah, here comes the Federation again. And it's like the Enterprise that's supposed to be the flagship of the fleet, also a scientific mission, is doing this fucking colonialist shit where you're like, okay, I didn't sign up for this. I didn't sign up for colonialism. I signed up for science. How do we get here? This feels like a subversion into making me think science depends upon colonialism, because that's what it feels like.
Wait. You mean to tell me that there's the well, no, just our galaxy is not sufficiently large enough and doesn't contain
Right.
enough crazy
Right.
crap going
Yeah.
on that they can't science
No.
someplace else. They have to science where
Even-
people are already.
The fight
What?
for resources extends all the way throughout the universe.
But they can't find a rock
It's-
floating around some star somewhere in the Milky
Fucking
Way
game theory.
that has all the stuff on it that doesn't exist. It doesn't make that's highly illogical.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure the Vulcans have figured out a way to get all of their resources without having to like displace entire peoples. Like, why can't the Federation do that? Why can't
Well, and that's where, to me, at least the
I think-
burn.
maybe the
it-
Cardassians are involved because it is a Deep Space Nine story, right? I think we're thinking
Yeah,
the same
I mean,
one,
and
right?
it's not to
Wesley
say that-
shows up
yeah.
and saves the day with his Wesley powers.
It's not to say that they can't have conflict and things like that. It's more so the conflicts that they do have feel like modern things just put into a future setting, whereas in Discovery, at least the burn felt like a universal scale problem that everyone had to fight together or not together, and then it caused friction because of whatever. But at least it's not as base as like, oh, we're fighting over a planet's resources, and the Cardassians want to live here, and this fucking tribe that we kicked out because we're fucking still kind of basic as humans, even though we have the Federation. They had to move off the planet because we don't have enough fucking space for everybody.
There's not enough space in space.
So that like arbitrary imposition of modern problems into the future, it feels like a stunted perspective on actually creating new problems in a futuristic setting, because it's like projecting into the future is not just, oh, we have lasers and flying cars, but the exact same problems. It's like, no, we should have solved some of the problems. So new problems should have come about. Like, show us new problems, not the same fucking problem with lasers. It's just lazy.
Yeah, you mean to tell me it's the 24th century and we still have 20th century problems? I haven't figured these things out yet. That's what that's kind of the spotlight you're putting it on.
One of the things that is glaring about it is it's easy to forget, but empathy clearly wasn't widespread in the 90s, so much so that it was a fucking superpower on Star Trek. Like, the idea of like, it feels like they're lying, Captain. Oh, fucking thanks. Fucking thanks. You mean your mom can read minds, but you can't? Oh, but at the time, that is like enough to be enough of a superpower to justify this whole fucking character.
I mean, she could read someone's mind, not just like within the room, but like hundreds of kilometers away, or maybe 10 kilometers away at a close range, to a person on a bridge of another ship through multiple electromagnetic field arrays. But they could feel that, like, 10 kilometers away.
But you can guess that shit. But then they had some dude from the fucking 21st century who could do the same shit just by looking at somebody. Captain, he's lying. And fucking Picard couldn't tell for some dumbass reason. So he has to depend on this dude who barged on his fucking bridge and is being a dick to him, but can somehow intuit through this Cardassian's fucking facial expressions that he's lying. But goddamn Picard couldn't do it because he didn't have his goddamn empath. So it's like shit like that where you're like, it's not.
I'm pretty sure Spock was pretty good at calling people out on lying too.
Well, because he
just would logic them.
Partial empathy too. Like, it was like they were partial telepaths or some shit. But it's like they had to be. I think you had to be able to touch them or some shit. Like,
the mind.
He only mind melded once. I think that they used that very sparingly in the original series. But I think Vulcans still has some sort of like low level telepathy or something, at least with each other, maybe.
No, they retconned it to become more dangerous to the participants as the story develops. Because in the original series, I think that it was a way to gain intelligence, but I think in Next Generation they kind of expose more to the idea that it erodes the barriers of the mind, and by the time we get into Discovery, it's like, hey, you can do this, but it'll really mess you up. When Spock does it in the sixth movie, Undiscovered Country, like the actress, like, she does a really good job of portraying like the invasion of her mind by Spock, because that's really what it is. He invades her mind, which is fucked up, to extract information, and it takes a toll on him, but it really messes her up. And then by the time we get into that whole portion of Next Generation where he's hiding as a Romulan and trying to negotiate peace with Romulans, and like, oh man, Spock has such an incredible story arc.
Yeah. I think also it's really good that fucking Kirk, he did not go without repercussions for his actions, in that it seemed like in the original series he was just gallivanting around the galaxy, just like,
Space cowboy.
yeah, like dropping seeds, fucking breaking up revolutions or whatever, and when necessary, or
Yeah, there's no prime directive in the original series.
yeah, and it's like
They had order number
when
one,
all that
kind
shit came back to bite him in future installments. So
Yeah.
it's like they did not create and then he ran from it and hid from it in the Nexus, which is like, I think a fitting sort of like
I don't know if Kirk would have ever made Admiral in Picard's era. He would have been stuck on like some really small class of ship.
No, he definitely wouldn't have. And it's like, you can tell there's different societal rules that are represented through how Starfleet officers portray themselves. Whereas, like you're saying, Kirk in the 90s TNG era of Starfleet, he wouldn't have made it past like,
He'd have been a commander.
no, because they had like the Tom Paris incident when the whole crew fucking covered up the accident, and
Oh yeah.
it's like cowboys didn't make it in that era, and they would end up in the fucking brig or on a penal colony, and then they'd have
not
to
even
like
a penal colony, just like some kind of space station.
Yeah,
Just
and then they have to, like,
a fleet holding station out in the middle of nowhere, halfway between the neutral zone. What do we call it? Observatory station and normal Federation space. They would be out in the middle of fucking nowhere. It's a freight depot. That's the fate of cowboys in the Next Generation.
Yep. Which is then even further, where you're like, from Tom Paris to Michael Burnham.
Yeah, she ended up committing treason because of the regulation of Starfleet.
They did not reward that behavior.
So they're, with Strange New Worlds, they're trying to they're making Pike out to be a himbo, and so in a sense they're redefining the origin of Riker's himbo behavior.
Well, and that makes sense because Pike is like pre-Kirk.
Yeah.
And then that would perfectly track with this era of like the behavior being the cowboy himbo and that shit being rewarded by Starfleet. Like, that Pike would make Admiral. And that's where it's very, you see the handover in the 80s to the Next Generation in the films, and then the actual like attitude of Starfleet towards the officers' behavior change. Like, it's really funny. Like, they have Ryza, and it's like, you keep what happens on Ryza stays on Ryza, but you keep that shit on Ryza.
Ryza, the pleasure planet.
Yeah. Even to the point where it pissed off Worf so bad he had to like ruin everybody's goddamn parade.
Wait, didn't he like activate like some the weather module and turn it on like psychotic?
The weather stabilization.
Yeah.
It, like, he was working with the local cult and
he helped a rebellion. He helped incite a rebellion. Hey, you know what? If that's what Worf enjoys and wants to do on Ryza, where everyone gets to do what they want to do and have and experience the full extent of pleasurable activity, and that's what it takes, then you know what? The Ryzans actually accommodated Worf.
Well,
holy crap!
It's funny. Like, between the Next Generation and Deep Space Nine, there's like this sentiment that because the Federation's been at peace for so long, everybody's getting like reveling in pleasure too much, and Worf is upset at that, and there's clearly a bunch of people that are upset at that, and you're like, wait a minute, what's wrong with you people? Can't you just fucking relax? And it's like, no, they can't relax, and it defines Worf's character not to be able to relax. So instead of him just like learning how to actually relax, he like stages a fucking uprising against relaxing itself within the Federation. And you're like, this is a whack ass character, man. Worf used to be cool, or maybe he was never cool. Because like, no, he used to play poker, but then they take him and put him in this like weird situation where now suddenly he's like with Jedzia Dax, and we don't know why. If that's like, oh, it's because the actors thought it would be funny for them to start flirting on the show, so they actually basically spawned that relationship, but it's super random. So it's like,
no, it's not. She's the only attractive woman his age on a backwater in space station that's like sitting
she's
in the
like robbing the cradle, man.
No,
She's
no.
like-
Physically, I mean, physically, like intellectually, that the what should we call it? The trill. Sure, that means she's like hundreds of years old and
that's
is
why
like
Trill
intersex,
also always
and
sketchy, because it's like,
that's also kind of messed up. Because at one point,
she's like 200 or 300 years old dating this like 50-year-old or 40-year-old, and you're like, hey, that's still sketch.
But physically, she's in the right kind of ballpark for Worf, where she's still, physically capable of recovering in time to do her job.
Yeah, there's something off. There's something off with the Trill. It's
And so-
always like,
seriously, like it's probably compared to the Enterprise. Deep Space Nine might not actually be as interesting as the Enterprise. The Enterprise is like a flagship that gets to go all over the place and gets to scan all the weird shit. Deep Space Nine is sitting out in front of a stable wormhole and also sits like right between two planets that have had historical opposition, like bordering on genocide. And so one is this very known quantity. It's like, yeah, these are the things that happen. No, that doesn't ever happen. No. Well, we've got a local rebellion, but we can pretty much deal with them because we've got a trade deal with them on the side. And so it's way less complex than what could happen this time on the Enterprise. I don't know. We're going to go into this unknown void. There might be a nebula inside of it, but we can't scan beyond the void. That's kind of cool. That's going where no one has gone before. But there's no going where no one has gone before on Deep Space Nine. I think the thing that I like about Deep Space Nine is that it explores the Federation itself and what Starfleet actually means in a broader context of a quadrant under conflict. But it's not Star Trek. It's just a story in Star Trek universe. Because they're not Star Trekking. They're space stationing. I do love Deep Space Nine, though. I think it's the only time we actually get to see like the real bureaucratic nightmare that the Federation presents. Because even on this space station that, from what we've been told, is critical to the stability of the region, they, for whatever reason, don't have the resources that they need. So again, it makes me wonder, like, how is the Federation even... Who on the Federation Council signed off on the expansion of the Federation without securing the resources to do it? That seems like not the kind of thing that a interstellar organization, a federation of warp-capable people, like that doesn't seem like the kind of thing that should be happening, but it does.
Well, and that's kind of where I'm like, I can. Um,
They can't really maintain Deep Space Nine. They're
I can
always
go along with it, as especially Deep Space Nine is fantasy, but that's where I'm like, I think that's when it's
freaking
easier to go
wormhole
along
is super
with it.
fantasy.
Yeah, with the wormhole beings and shit, and it's like, hey, that's fine. But this isn't. We're not really in sci-fi anymore. I
Like
feel
the solar sail episode where Cisco and
Mhm.
his kid build the solar sail, and everything about that is awesome, and that's science fiction right up until the point they hit that warp stream or whatever that carried them.
Exactly. It's like science fiction up to a point,
And then it
and then
becomes
they
hardcore
sprinkle in
fantasy.
some fantasy.
Not sprinkle, man.
And
They
then-
turned on the faucet like fully open valve. And it got them from freaking Bajor to Cardassia in the span of an episode. Which we know can be anywhere from like a few minutes to, or a few hours to several days, maybe even a week or two if somebody's caught in some kind of continuity loop.
Well, but even then, I don't think dark matter streams are fantasy. Like, I think there's like a real life basis for that notion. So it's like, even in the way that they did that part, I think there's something.
Yeah, but didn't.
But at the time, they didn't know.
Yeah,
so that's why.
that's what I was about to say. Like, I don't know if that was even a theory at the time.
Yeah, exactly. You're right. Is at the time they didn't know, so that's why it's like it's not really accurate to the real world theory. So that's why it's like a faucet of fantasy.
Yeah,
and not
it can
just
only work
sprinkling.
because the faucet of fantasy managed to spit out something that was like that got used, or that like actually exists. But otherwise, that's the whole throw a bunch of crap on the wall and see what sticks method.
Yeah, and that's where
that's not a good method for like advancing science.
No, I mean, but I don't know if it's that's their job.
It's not. It's science fiction. It's fantasy science fiction.
Yeah,
they can make up whatever they want, and it's cool as long as the story moves along and is entertaining and spurs imagination.
Yeah.
And as long as it activates the imagination center of the audience, then I think they're doing an okay job. Provided the story isn't
so
crap.
For example, like if something is claiming to be science fiction and is going to examine like artificial intelligence or something, then it needs to be rooted in some sort of logic as to why that story is related to a real world issue that could become the eventual problem that's presented in the storyline without just drifting into pure fantasy. So that's
I think science fiction literature has traditionally been like a foretelling of fear. It's like hey, we're concerned about the rate of industrialization, so here's a story about industrialization.
So like Ready Player One, I feel like is really good science fiction, because it's almost 100% rooted in real science.
That's such a hardcore science fiction experience.
I think something like that.
I think that's a story that may have not gotten the right kind of attention because the future that it paints is it's so bright and vivid, but it's also really dark and very sinister. And they did a really good job of masking it. And so it seems like a comic book story, but it's a really well done like dystopian science fiction story. Incredibly well done.
Yeah, because even then, like 1984 could be considered realistic science fiction, or like really, I think that's why it holds up.
Yeah.
Like now we don't consider it I mean, I don't think a lot of people consider it sci-fi, but it really kind of is. So, um,
Well, we
and then
in the past I've mentioned that like we're way past 1984. We're in like the Brave New World phase.
right. I mean, even in Brave New World, you know, I don't.
Yeah, I mean we're getting
That's clearly sci-fi, in its presentation. But because it was written so long ago, I don't think many in their minds would consider it like science fiction necessarily.
It's
like,
funny because it's like really hardcore sci-fi.
Yeah, exactly.
It's
which
like
is why,
so
again,
it's such hardcore science fiction that like the brilliance of that level of science fiction though is that they leave enough to the imagination where you can imagine your own flying machines and you can imagine the sound and the smells yourself because they leave enough for the mind to fill it, enough blanks for the mind to fill in. And I think what happens with like hyper real storytelling, like with video and imagery based storytelling, is that they're able to compose scenes that are so complicated, that have so much information that it's just like doesn't require any thought. You just have to observe because it's all there in front of you. Like lighting in movies today is so specific. They'll illuminate exactly what you're supposed to be looking at. You won't even realize that it has just barely a little bit more light than everything else around it. And then the way that the sound is used too, like all of these things tie into each other. Like the psychoacoustic principles that are being used to essentially engage the listener faster so that they can control your blood pressure with the soundtrack.
Yeah, I feel like that's cheap.
Oh yeah.
And that's where like I don't enjoy when producers do that type of shit. And that's where I'm like, it's especially with like video games too, with first person shooters that are semi like, not, they don't even have to be horror. Like BioShock is a fucking great game, but I hate the jump scares that they try to pull just by like the audio. Like, it'll like be a loud impact from something hitting you from where you can't see it. So that's how they let you know you've been stabbed in the back or something. And it's like, that's why I like third person rather than first person, because it's easy for them to just use that type of shit and then put you on a track and then force you into a jump scare. Even like in the third person Resident Evil, they could put you on a track and force you into a jump scare. Like you have to walk by a window, and then as soon as you're like 2 steps past it, they activate the animation of the thing popping out. And it's like, man, I get what you're doing, but it feels fucking cheap and manipulative where
you know what I liked about Silent Hill is it was always very similar to like Resident Evil, except it seemed like when you triggered the appearance of some kind of adversary, it was like a dice roll or like a random number was generated to determine when or where they would actually appear in that area. Like you might get a few steps, you might get 10 steps, you might actually almost get to the door out of the room, and then they appear. And it always seemed like that whole game franchise always induced a lot of anxiety every time I tried to play it.
Yeah. And that's why I didn't play it. Because it was like, I knew what they were doing where I'm like, I don't need this in my life. You know, if I'm going to play a video game, I'm not going to like put myself in a situation where I'm confined in a hallway or a closet most of the fucking time and not able to dodge and roll at least. Like if I can't dodge and roll, I'm not fucking playing. Fuck this. And it's like, you know, with Gotham Knights, I've found one of the things that makes it more immersive is like if you are just like riding around in the city or like sitting somewhere, you might hear something in the distance, and then you have to figure out where it's coming from, and then like hone in on it. Where if it's not to say everything needs to be open sandbox, but when you're put in these really, some people may enjoy it, and I'm sure people that like horror movies enjoy those claustrophobic games where they don't give you space to move around and like escape from the thing that's attacking you. But it's like those types of people are attracted to Pyramid Head too, and they like want to have sex with Pyramid Head. So it's like there's a special type of person that really enjoys the Silent Hill franchise and the
it's
Resident Evil franchise. It's not us.
It's definitely not.
That's not us. Nothing nothing
So,
against them.
when
That's like a special type of preference.
When I was in the 7th grade, I watched a movie. I think it was on like AMC. My parents were out of town, and there was a storm, just dark and nasty out. And so I'm watching this like Vincent Price horror movie, black and white horror movie, and it's mostly like strings and kind of uncomfortable situations and tapping noises on windows and like environmental sounds that really aren't even that creepy now because I'm an adult and I'm not afraid of, a tree. It's pretty easy to tell when trees are going to lose branches or going to fall down. But, when I'm in the 7th grade, this is like terrifying. And years later, I'm playing Silent Hill, and I have this similar experience where it's just horrible out. And I had this, but instead of watching the entire movie, playing the game, just playing it through, I just stopped because it wasn't even fun. It was like an exposure to sunk cost that I didn't even realize. I wouldn't realize that it was a sunk cost experience for a long time, but I succeeded. And I got through it because I stopped playing and I said, this isn't fun. I've only played like the first Resident Evil game, and I've watched other people play Resident Evil games. But even as shooters or action games where you get to blow things up, it's not even that. I didn't even think they were that much fun.
No. Well, and again, it's like, I guess you have to be a special type of person to enjoy that, because I remember when the Resident Evil game came out, I'm like, okay, I'll play this game. And it's like, how scary can it be? And I'm like, I'll play it at fucking 3 a.m.
Yeah.
Stupid fucking idea.
Yeah.
That was a stupid fucking idea. And that's where it's like,
when that's the only sound you can hear is the video game, that's a terrible idea.
Oh, it's a fucking terrible idea. And that's where the whole thing is like, it's meant to induce that feeling of like, oh, you're scared or whatever.
It's anxiety.
But
it's
then
just punishing.
you realize what actually happens and like the jump scares that they induce. And then when you're like actually alone and there's nobody awake anywhere because it's 3 a.m, it's like the worst fucking idea in the world. And then it's like, I don't know why I'm doing this, so I stopped playing. And then I don't know if I don't think I finished the game, but it's like,
so I haven't played like Call of Duty or any of the like the the modern warfare type games where they try to emulate realistic guns and environments and use all the military stuff that exists now or is in like future development pipeline type things. I haven't seen any of those games in a while, but I don't recall in any of those games when someone dies, their body lays there with like their stomach kind of exposed, their like their organs exposed and like kind of falling out of their bodies. And I don't see any pictures of people with like heads like with half their face missing, and you can see like detail because we've got the games have the ability to give that kind of detail now, like really easily. And I realize that would be like
they could do Mortal Kombat shit, but they don't.
Yeah,
they nerf it.
Yeah, they really nerf it. So like obviously people want the violence, but they don't want the graphic violence. They want it to be clean violence. And that's actually kind of, I think that's kind of dishonest.
I mean, it's definitely dishonest, and it's like it's at the same time, like, what is it intended to do? Because if we're going to,
if we're playing some kind of like sword and sandal fighting game, are we actually going to get to see someone get eviscerated and their like intestines fall out of their belly before they collapse to the ground, and then you behead them or some crap? Is that game in the pipeline? Because that's kind of the reality of people getting slashed open.
Yeah, but that's the difference between a game that like gives you those options versus one where if you're not actually using lethal force, then that person never dies. So it wouldn't get to that point. And that's like the difference between a protagonist that doesn't kill versus these games where you're just like unloading lethal rounds as if, like you're saying, the way that people use these guns, there should be very much more gore that they're showing on the screen, but it gets nerfed to make it easier to deal with like a 13 kill count in one 3-minute session or something like that.
Halo and games like, I guess, Crisis 2 to an extent, where they were extensive armor. All the NPCs were an extensive amount of body armor. Like when they get shot, sure, it makes sense that like neon blood comes spurting out of them because it's some kind of alien, and you don't get to see a lot of inside because they're basically wearing a can, and so most of it's contained. That actually kind of makes sense. It's kind of a clever way of getting around the graphic nature of someone getting shot with a high velocity, high powered projectile. But anytime a person gets shot with some kind of machine gun, there should be splatter everywhere, and their body shouldn't just like evaporate. It should be part of the landscape now. Games should be able to handle that kind of stuff. Bodies should be able to pile up. If there's like the endless wave levels where every time you clear the certain character that it triggers the next wave, you've got to clear another 20 tunes or whatever. And this happens 4 or 5, however, whatever your difficulty level setting determines how many waves there are and how hard they are. Like at some point, the bodies should pile up. They shouldn't be disappearing. That would make it more interesting.
Well, and that's where in some games they do.
Yeah.
So like I think in Witcher's
a really good game.
If you kill something, I'm pretty sure the body is there
like for the rest of the game.
Yeah. And it's like
Witcher's a fantastic game though, because it also has an incredible story. It has a very good story.
Has the benefit of being an adaptation, so that's where.
I'm not sure that Call of Duty actually has a story.
It does, but they're not usually that great.
Yeah, but it's like the story of someone being deployed to do stuff, right? I mean,
well, yeah, but they'll put like some actual storyline because it's not always going to be.
I don't think I've ever
based on a real war.
I think every time I've seen that game in action, it was always in multiplayer and online gameplay. I don't think I've ever even.
That's how people play them.
I don't think I've ever seen that game in like campaign mode.
I've only played it in campaign. I hate playing online in those types of games, which is where like, yeah, I played it. I got it and played the campaign of one of them just because one of my friends was playing, and that's where I was like, oh, let me check this out just to see if like. The first person shooter genre is like any better. I realized it was never not fun so much as the people online make it not fun. And it's like first person shooters can be fun, but it's just that's where, the campaign, uh what's it called? Titanfall 2. Have you played that?
No, I've not.
It's a lot of fun. But I would never play that shit online just because people are fucking annoying. It would just be like subjecting yourself to unnecessary trauma. But
It makes you feel like something like Cyberpunk could never succeed in a massive multiplayer online environment because a world full of cyberpunk dudes all acting out. That just seems like absolute chaos. No single city could endure like hundreds or thousands or tens of thousands of these elite hackers just wrecking the place all the time.
Yeah.
That's just a city can survive maybe 2 or 3 elite hackers, and then they have to start up their own Section 9, and then those hackers are screwed because the major's coming after their asses.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it's like, okay, I play online games where either they restrict the headset to like lobbies because you don't necessarily need it in the game, or if there's people online who don't talk, and it's like, oh, I can get along with this person because they don't need to be in the fucking microphone all the time to get some online enjoyment, or to they don't need to like talk to the person to coordinate with them. So, for example, I've been playing Avengers for a long time, and then eventually you'll play with the same people, or you'll get matched in the matchmaking with the same team a few times if you play frequently enough. So like I'll have friends who play Avengers, and then now one of them plays Gotham Knights. So like because we've played a different game together, like we both know how we operate, and it's really kind of funny to see the dynamic of like gameplay in one venue actually working and making it a better team situation in the other arena, which is where, again, like, because we've been playing on Avengers and not talking to each other, and like we've played enough games where it's like, oh, I know how this guy plays, he knows how I play. What I don't know from what other perspective what my gameplay would look like, but this guy understands it because that's like he's been on my team enough. Yeah. So I think that's what the Call of Duty people enjoy, but I enjoy it in like third person.
So years ago on Xbox platform, I played a game. It was an X-Men game, and I played this game with the same 3 people. We played it for like 2 months. We must have played it for
Ultimate Alliance.
Maybe it was a
Ultimate Alliance was awesome.
And so, but we all gravitated towards specific characters. And once we figured out the mechanics of the game, we must have played the game for like, almost a month without realizing that we were supposed to level up the characters. And so we're sitting there one day, and one of my buddies is like, dude, did you realize that we were supposed to be like, leveling these guys up? I was like, what do you mean? And he opens up this one sub menu, and he's like, look, it says there's like 64 points. He starts plugging it in and unlocking different abilities. And next thing you know, we're finally able to get past some level. And then the game started making more sense. And, but because we all gravitated to like, 2 or 3 specific characters, we were able to develop like kind of like a behavioral, behaviors within these sub teams within the groups. And it made the gameplay really interesting because, certain characters lend themselves to certain types of behavior within a level. I think that's the kind of thing that I enjoyed. I enjoyed that kind of gaming where everyone is in the room together. And it's it's difficult to achieve that over the internet, I think.
Well, and it is. And I think you can,
We were almost in an arcade, essentially, you know.
right. I mean, but you can present that framework or make it sort of more organic occurring where, like, if you're playing Gotham Knights, if you're online, you're just going to be in your normal world, but then you're gonna like see your friend on the horizon, or like you may see the name pop up in the distance, and then you can go find them in the city, and it's
Man,
like, or you can not. So it's like
we
it's
need to.
closer to GTA than
I mean,
anything.
this is like primed for a Gotham Knights LAN party event tournament
Totally, yeah.
where you get like, you know,
But it's co-op, so it's like you're working together, which is the coolest part.
yeah,
Where you're like,
you can have teams forming organically within the Gotham environment, and they can work
yeah,
together to achieve their goals. And by the end of the night, you look and see who has there's a way to determine who wins the tournament, like points or something, right?
how many crimes they solved
Yeah,
in one night, or whatever.
and
But it's like from that, there's all kinds of stuff that you can do in that format that it wasn't necessarily possible with Avengers, the way that the matchmaking was set up. Like you can work with specific people, but because it's like the loading between matches is like delayed, it doesn't feel like you're out in a city fighting crime. It's like, oh, you're getting deployed to these scenes and then going back to the base. That's one thing, because they do that in other games like Anthem. Anthem's really good about making it feel like you're being deployed to somewhere, but it still doesn't feel quite as organic as like seeing somebody's name pop up on the horizon and you're like, oh shit, it's the homie. And then you go find them and then start a mission from there without like going being at a base or something. So there's different ways to create sense of immersion, but also make the worlds more real with the online play. But I understand that there's limitations too, because that's why I think right now it's like only 4 people at a time can co-op in this particular one. And even then, it's like in the Call of Duty servers, I think they might the biggest ones I think might go up to 32 with 16 on each side. Which is like, I think that might be pushing. I mean, granted, there's other games in which you can have battlefields of like however many people are just in the server, and it's like there's no real cap, but it's because the fidelity or the image textures are lower quality, or like
I mean, I'm pretty sure you can like rent a private server for LAN parties for like modern for Call of Duty, for like Modern Warfare LAN party.
right, but because of the textures, it's still there's still going to be like an upper limit on how many people can go into a server, unless you like run it at the lowest texture qualities.
I'm sure that there would be a way around it if you had like a local private server that was just running a powerhouse of hardware. But that's probably not within the licensing structure that they have available. I don't know enough about their private server licensing. I know that they do it though. But it'll depend on whether or not Gotham Knights reaches critical mass, and if they get to a point where they want to be able to license a private server for, you know, a weekend or something, and then provided somebody has enough computing power, they can host the server. And it'll just be like the meeting, all the people who come into that environment meeting the minimum hardware requirements to enjoy everything. So if there's still a cap of four people per multiplayer environment at a time, that'd still be fine, because then it's just a matter of how. Then it's more like how many, like you said, how many crimes can they solve? And then it's weighted for, like, a person trying to attain Batman level crime fighting ability. They would be flying solo, so they wouldn't have a handicap multiplier. But a team of 4 people, they should be able to solve crimes faster, right?
Holy shit! So Call of Duty allows up to 150 players in a single game at once now. That's fucking crazy.
Well, so I know EVE Online does everyone in a enclosed sandbox, so they've had anywhere from, like, I think 12,000 up to 30,000 people on their server active during, like, large scale corporate wars. But I know that, like, Star Trek Online, it seems like they cap at like 24 people per server. And I know that...
Yeah, and Star Trek Online is way lower image quality, too.
Oh, yeah. Star Trek Online is like... It's not even, like, kid cartoon level versus... Like, EVE now, they did a massive upgrade to their immersion. They've got cloud textures and nebulas now that are just incredible. The game was always beautiful, but they've definitely figured out a way to take advantage of modern GPUs. Space games are always challenging, though, because there's a lot of space. So it can't be, like, have too much crap in it. Otherwise, it feels claustrophobic. Like, why is there so much crap in space? That's actually the reason I always like that. I like EVE is that it still has a scale factor that, if you want to travel from one sector to another, it still takes a while. You can't just, like, magically transwarp to 10 sectors away. You've got to program your flight and press go, and then you got to wait for it to happen. And then some missions are, like, time based, so you are rewarded for busting ass and hustling.
Yeah, I do appreciate, even though some of them may make it slightly more tedious, like the first Mass Effect game, I did enjoy the space mining, where it did make it feel like it was, like, really far apart, even though there wasn't actually a ton of, like, travel on the ship necessarily, but they made it seem like you'd have to travel a lot and far using the Mass Effect fields to find resources. It's like you might go somewhere and then the planet didn't have anything on it, and then you'd have to travel again, and a lot of people didn't enjoy that, but that was, like, one of my personal favorite parts, and that's...
I always thought it was funny that there was controversy surrounding that game because of, what was it, like the alien love interest or something like that?
Right, yeah, because you could be pansexual, basically.
Yeah, and some people threw a big fit about that.
Yep. Yeah, they definitely did. Because you could have, even if it didn't matter if you were a male or a female as the protagonist, it would let you have romantic interest with basically everybody that was available. Yeah, it lets you basically bang everybody, and then gave sex scenes along with it, which was, like, not really heard of at the time either. And they weren't like obscene, like vulgar, but they were graphic. And it's like, I think there's definitely a line between graphic and vulgar, and I think they like found a good line. But I think anybody who's like anti-sexuality would say it's all vulgar. It's really not, It was an adult game, so
yeah, that's what I was. That's what I was just thinking. It's like that's not really a kids game. A lot of these games aren't kids games.
It was like rated M for mature. Like, so it's like if you bought that for your kid, that's a terrible parent.
That's just, there are a lot of games that kids shouldn't be playing.
Yeah. Which when the entry level for a lot of these game systems is like $400 and $500, it's like I don't think kids should be playing hardly any of them. In reality, like, not to say that they can't play games, but the idea that a kid gets a $400 or $500 game system as a child,
plus a $300 TV.
Yeah,
so they're up to $700-$800 right away. And how much are new games for those game systems? $50,
like $60,
$70. How much is a controller? $30-$40. So we're already up to like,
at least
we're already up to like
$60-$70.
We're like up to $800-$900 already just to play one fucking game.
Mm-hmm. And this is what a lot of parents would be sort of racing against each other to give their child during Christmas seasons. So like I actually really enjoyed when the chip shortage made it impossible for fucking a bunch of kids to get PS5s. So I'm like, you don't understand a PS5. You shouldn't be playing a PS5.
Yeah, they need to suffer with an 8-bit system like we did.
No,
I'm just kidding. I'm
like
kidding.
that, but it's like again, because 8-bit systems are like you can buy that shit for like $5 now. So it's like they don't need to go that low.
Well, you can get every Nintendo title for like $30, I think, nowadays with a plug-in system that plugs into an HD TV and has HD graphics.
But like a PSP or a PSP Vita is like probably $50-$60 now, or maybe the extreme versions are $70. Shit like that is not bad, and is not even remotely close to like 8-bit. You could like play video on some of those, which is where they don't have to be getting like a fucking Atari, which even then the Atari, if it's like a real Atari, shit's probably going to be overpriced.
Oh man.
But
if it still works, if the capacitors haven't blown, if they haven't leaked all of their electrolytic juices out, if the resistors are still intact and haven't like just gone completely brittle and just disintegrated, if the transistors haven't just aged out, like all the things that can go wrong with
an
ancient,
2600
ancient electronics, when they power up, like having sat for decades, there's a chance they can explode. Like, I mean, not a big explosion. They might pop. They might catch on fire, though.
Yeah, so an Atari 2600 with a bunch of games and controllers is $150.
Man, but how much is one of those loaded mini Nintendo systems that has like 2 controllers? I think those are like $50 now, right? That has every freaking Nintendo game you want, like all the Zeldas, all the Marios.
Oh yeah, I mean, because they're like actually a Raspberry Pi.
Yeah, but you can get a game system that'll play every Nintendo game, every Super Nintendo game, every Genesis game, every Neo Geo game.
That's what I'm saying. It's like most of the time those are like actually Raspberry Pis.
Sure. That's great. I love emulators.
In like a Nintendo case, which or
And they have a imitation Nintendo controller, a rectangular controller, but it has like 6 buttons,
Yeah,
and
it's an imitation and Super Nintendo controller. Yeah, I have one, as a matter of fact, which is where again it's definitely a Raspberry Pi.
like being able to play like a Super Mario World on a thing that looks like a miniature Nintendo is really cool.
Yeah, so like an actual original NES is like 175, $200 in that range. But then, like you're saying, the ones that are the consoles that actually have all the games just loaded in is like $40.
And maybe I'm just confused, but Zelda is a story that was successful in 8-bit, so it doesn't actually need complex graphics to be fun.
Granted, I don't think those things are technically legal when a lot of those, like they'll sell them. The ones at Best Buy are obviously legal, but you'll find the ones online that are.
Well, yeah, they're running like Dolphin or
probably-
something. They're running like a Dolphin emulator or
because that's
some
what
kind of.
Soldier Boy got in trouble for. When he thought Nintendo wasn't gonna sue him. And he's like gloating about it, and then they fucking sent him a cease and desist the next day.
So here's the thing. Like I was for a very short while I was in possession of a AMD APU powered laptop. It had like an A8 or A6. It wasn't very powerful. It had 2 cores. It actually had decent graphics performance though. It would output 1080p at 60 hertz. And it would do really crisp video. And it was slow if I opened up more than 3 tabs on Chrome, but I could play most fun lightweight games on emulators. Like any Nintendo or Super Nintendo emulator was fine, and it would even emulate a few GameCube titles. Like I could play Mario Sunshine, and I could play Metroid Prime on an AMD APU-based system. You know, everything's built into one little motherboard, and it was really tiny. It had a slow EMCC or eMMC storage, but it had pretty quick RAM. And for what it was really fun. It was like a miniature Nintendo or Genesis. Go anywhere. So I know that it doesn't take much power to actually host a game, like a GameCube session, which I think was the most taxing or demanding environment that I was emulating on that computer. So by now it's perfectly reasonable that one of those little hockey puck sized nano computer things, those things should totally be able to emulate everything up to a GameCube. And there's a lot of really fun games that all exist right up to the GameCube. Dreamcast exists right up into the GameCube, so there's a whole load of really fun games there. Like, I'm pretty sure that Soul Calibur 1 is always going to be fun.
Yeah, it definitely is. But Soul Calibur 6 is also fucking amazing.
Soul Calibur 6 is just brilliant looking. That's a really good franchise, though. That's a franchise that's just continues to get better. Like, they've tapped into the same kind of mojo that Street Fighter has.
Yeah, for sure. I think it's also finding its own style and gameplay mechanics, which is where I see a lot of other games now being like new games get defined by old game mechanics unless they develop their own mechanics, which is really difficult to do.
Yeah.
And it's like everything. I don't mean everything, but a good significant chunk of things being produced are intentionally referential and don't set out to create new mechanics and lean on old mechanics. And I don't know, for the sake of like artistic and visual creation, that's great. but it does kind of feel like sometimes game development gets stale and falls in on itself because nobody's creating any new mechanics.
Yeah, like Killer Instinct. It always felt like it wanted to look like Mortal Kombat, but it wanted to play more like Street Fighter. But then you could just chain your combos endlessly. And the thing that I always liked about Soul Calibur is that it was like the most surgical version of Killer Instinct or Mortal Kombat, but it had you could play it really fast if you were really surgical with your input. Because that's a game that didn't reward button mashing at all.
Yeah, and it's like, I think if you're a button masher, Killer Instinct, at the early stages, you'd get away with it. But if you went up against somebody who was skilled in the arcade, they're going to own you.
Yeah.
And that's where it rewarded them for learning like the ultra combos and shit like that. But when you're a kid and you go up against a grown person and they can memorize the ultra combo and your brain just can't, it's like really frustrating. Not to say that no kid can.
No, I was the kid that memorized all the combos for Killer Instinct, and I would just own the console for like $1 or 50 cents. I would go to Aladdin's Castle, and that machine was mine. And occasionally somebody would try to take it from me, but they couldn't. And I would play till I beat it, and then I would leave.
Well, but that's where, on the one hand, it's like that's how you dominate that game. But it felt akin to like when you have to memorize. You don't have to, but the people who memorize chess sequences to be like dominant players, where it's like that's one way to go about it, but that doesn't necessarily guarantee that they'll win, even if they memorize all of the possible known scenarios, because there's still this element of real-time chaos, and that's what I enjoy. And that's when I like learning the different types of games where Mortal Kombat didn't have endless combos, and then like around Mortal Kombat 3 there would be characters that would give you a sense of endless combos because the people who figured it out could overlap animations and basically make it impossible for you to move.
Yeah.
So it's like games like that when you basically, if somebody knows what they're doing, you basically just stand there and watch them win, and you can't really do anything about it. Yeah. Whereas then you get games like, no, it's not. You get games like Guilty Gear that give you a button to be able to cancel those types of combos. If somebody's like in the third hit of a combo, if you can hit the button quick enough, you can basically cancel out their combo and then end that sequence, so you're not stuck, but you have to know that button and use it because if you use it at the wrong time, then you're vulnerable. So it's like that.
Didn't the Capcom series, like Capcom versus whatever, they introduced that whole block combo sequence.
Marvel's Capcom.
And then there's like Capcom
and
versus
Combo Breakers
SNK, and just the whole Capcom versus series is actually incredible to me because they've got like all of the Neo Geo fighters eventually appear in them at some point, and you get fighters from just games that started out with completely different fighting mechanics start to appear. Characters that don't make sense, like fucking Mega Man is a lot of fun to fight with because he's fucking Mega Man.
Well, and this is where, for whatever reason, it's been decided in the industry that PC gamers like hyper realistic fighting and not simulating fighting, like in terms of like Fight Night or the UFC games, which are more akin to simulators. There's game elements, but it's meant to be more realistic. So it's not like you're shooting fireballs or fucking can do double jumps or shit like that. You're actually limited to realistic motions. and the rule sets for that matter. So when you have these games that are only on console and you're not getting them on PC, it also ends up like, I think, shaping the culture where, as you're saying, in the like venues in which weapons are actually involved, because these people are not actually used to real life presentations of things in the video game setting. They're getting these hyper real, but in the other way where they're like, because even in Street Fighter, it's like, you know, nobody's getting their skull ripped off and their spine hanging out or anything into the extent of the Mortal Kombat franchise. But because you're doing all of this damage and you don't even really end up seeing any semblance of like them actually getting hurt, it desensitizes people to violence in a way that then is not necessarily going to encourage them to go participate in violence, but it's going to escalate their need to see some sort of like, now in Street Fighter 6, you got to have the spray paint fucking graffiti when somebody gets hit. And it's like, because they're not going to show you blood, they have to like keep escalating the visual titillation some other way. So now it's like hyper color, hyper real. Oh, if you do like a super move, it's like you see 3 lit up versions of yourself spinning at once, and then the screen turns blue, and then somebody says ultra, 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 and then you hit them, but they don't show blood still. So it's like they have to, like I said, they have to keep escalating.
Have you played Dragon Ball Fighters?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That
was never realistic.
Yeah, it's true.
Like Dragon Ball Z was like about somebody who fucking wished things on fucking Dragon Ball. So there's never any semblance of reality in that universe, which is fine. So when, you know, if you base a fighting game on it and people are like shooting fireballs, we're definitely not in the real world already. So I'm, you know, nothing against things that are like unabashedly unrealistic. That's Dragon Ball and Dragon Ball Z and Dragon Ball Super. They're not trying to be like reality whatsoever.
And there's like a new Street Fighter on the horizon too.
Yeah, Street Fighter 6 is about to come out.
And I have every expectation that it's going to look gorgeous.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure it will. But having played Street Fighter 5, there's this like, they have to keep upping the ante of like, so if you hit somebody in the right spot, they might have like a environmental ending where you knock them through the wall or knock them into a barrel.
Oh, cool. There's like a probability they've introduced for like additional outcomes.
Yeah, for ending the fight, but it's also about location and like proximity to like the end of the levels, like perimeter. And if you have to hit a certain, like it won't be a low attack. It'd have to be like a fierce attack. So there's like certain conditions that would trigger these animations, and it makes it, yeah, it does make it more interesting. So, but then when you like knock somebody into a barrel and then they have like some birds flying over their head, and it's like, okay, we're hyper real cartoon violence. Okay, that's fine. But then there'll be shit sprinkled in. Like there's like a jujitsu fighter where a lot of her moves are like hyper, like they're real jujitsu moves, but exaggerated into a hyper version where like if somebody could like jump from 10 feet and then hit an arm bar in that same motion, we'd be living in a really strange fucking comic book world. Nobody can actually do that, but this character can. So it's like,
well, I mean, you know, what I always thought was funny is the size of Ken and Ryu's feet and their hands.
Yeah. Look like some fucking Neanderthals.
They're like wearing size 27 quadruple G footbed shoes. That's why.
That's like Mike Tyson has like size 20 feet or something. Or,
that's
I don't know.
That's why they had to wear those
Stupid.
wooden sandals, because that was the only way they could protect their feet from the environment, because they couldn't find shoes in their size.
15. Yeah, Mike Tyson wears size 15 shoes.
That's still a gigantic fucking foot.
That's a gigantic foot for somebody who's not 6 feet tall. He's 5'10" and a size 15 shoe, which is where that is some like fucking Ken and Ryu shit.
He's like an inch and a half taller than me, and his shoe size is like almost 5 sizes bigger, 4.5 sizes bigger than mine. That's in just. I went to high school with a guy who wore a size 14 shoe, and that was a giant foot.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, incredibly gigantic foot. I'm pretty sure a size 15 is an entire extra toe. Like,
yeah. I think it's Shaq that I was thinking of. It's like a 22. Oh, it's a 23. Yeah.
That's a small lifeboat.
Well, I don't know if you there was like an it was like an athletic shoe store in Indianapolis. It definitely went out of business.
Was it up in
71st Allisonville?
Yeah.
I can't even think of the name, but they had one of Shaq's shoes on display.
Yeah, it's like the length of your arm.
Yeah. As a child, that shit, it was like
from your shoulder to your wrist, probably.
Comical. Yeah, it was comical. How big the actual shoe was compared to the actual, like, my person. It didn't seem real.
You know what's interesting is that he's a DJ. He does his Shaq DJ sets, and he's not actually a bad DJ at all. He's actually a pretty decent DJ. What's amazing is how gigantic he is in front of a pair of decks. Because he's a gigantic dude, and you know that the needle's not big in the hands of normal sized people. But
well, it's like I was randomly searching videos of Shaq holding like normal sized things. And it's like it's really funny actually seeing Shaq hold normal sized shit. Like bottles of water. It looks really funny, man. Which is why, again, like I don't know what I think there may have been an image of him like drinking a bottle of water. I'm like, hold up. No, you know what? It was him holding a regular sized basketball. That shit looks ridiculous on its own.
Or a slice of pizza or a donut.
Yeah. It's like, what does normal shit look like when Shaq holds it? And it's like totally worth the whole internet rabbit hole of like Shaq holding normal sized things.
Shaq eating a chicken wing is pretty good.
Mm-hmm.
It's so tiny.
It doesn't look real. Again,
no.
They all look like photoshopped images of a person holding miniature things, but no, they're normal size.
He's holding an extra large size thing of Gold Bond, and it looks tiny in his hand.
Yeah. Because then you like see him next to like The Rock, and then The Rock looks like a tiny person.
The Rock is huge, though.
Yeah, exactly. Like you gotta be a gigantic person to make The Rock look like a tiny person.
Like at a glance, I could see how someone might think that it was like an overweight Idris Elba in front of a miniature deck, but Shaq in front of the decks is just comical.
Yeah, it's when you have Shaq and Charles Barkley standing next to The Rock and Mark Wahlberg, like you could not imagine that those people would be made to look like tiny normal human beings, because The Rock is not a tiny normal human being, but Shaq makes him look fucking like a tiny normal.
Wait, we need
John Cena. This is crazy.
we need to get Shaq.
John Cena's not tiny at all.
We need to get Shaq, The Rock, John Cena, and Kevin Hart in the same room.
Oh, they did. Oh wait, no, this is not a real. Somebody photoshopped Kevin Hart and The Rock and Shaq in the same.
I want to see all of them in like a Dodge Caravan together. And put Shaq
The
like
Shocks can handle it.
No. Put Kevin Hart in the back of the way back. Put The Rock in the middle. Put Shaq in the front. So it's like the perspective makes everyone like even more out of proportion. That's the way to do it. Then Shaq is even bigger.
I wonder if there's a picture of Kevin Hart and Shaq, and I just don't know if it's real or not because it looks pretty comical.
So there's a picture of Shaq getting into a smart car, and it's totally like the big guy in a little car from Simpsons. His knees are up in his face, and he's hunched over, like his face is in the steering wheel. He's barely inside the thing. It's him and John Cena together inside a smart car, and there's not enough room for their shoulders. Oh God.
Man. Yeah. Which, not to say.
Hey, and Charles Barkley is a big dude, but
there's plenty of things happening in the world where it's like, I don't know what would.
No, there's a picture of Shaq and Kevin Hart.
About Shaq holding things is like that. I think that is good of representing like where a lot of people are probably at mentally, where it's like, I'd rather look at images of Shaq holding normal sized things than like check in on the news again. There's
an image of Shaquille O'Neal standing next to like a Crown Victoria police cruiser, and the roof line of the cruiser is just barely above his belt line. For scale. The picture of him and Kevin Hart that I found, the top of Kevin Hart's head is just below the handkerchief in the breast pocket of Shaquille O'Neal's blazer. He is a very tall dude.
Yeah, which I feel like there may be a Shaq resurgence at some point. I don't think he necessarily ever went away. But because considering, like you're saying, he DJ'd, he rapped, he was in movies. Like
Shaq's only goofy because he's a giant, but Shaquille O'Neal is actually pretty fucking awesome. Like
he really put his mind to it. He could be like The Rock.
Oh yeah, Shaq's awesome. What's other than having difficulty
I'm
with,
not saying
with
he's
free
not,
throws,
he's
like
a success in his own right, in the sense of like, oh yeah, he's got a bunch of money. But,
well, and he eventually overcame the free throw issue, and
yeah,
he does.
But as far as like cultural relevance, The Rock is like over 50 years old, right?
Oh, I don't even know.
Maybe he's like 40. He's at least close to 50, if not like 51 or 52. For him to be that culturally relevant at that age, for starting off as
he's
basically
50
like
years old,
a football player, turned pro wrestler, like that's pretty fucking. It's like beyond the money in the sense of being able to stay culturally relevant that long. Is like only something like Snoop Dogg and LL Cool J, or like.
Man, I haven't thought about LL Cool J in a while.
Very few people have been able to do.
Snoop Dogg, definitely. I'm not so sure that LL Cool J has the same kind of.
Well, but it's not to us. he was on like the in a what was it like not CSI. It was some TV show for a while.
Huh.
So it's like it wasn't with our crowd.
Yeah, I know, but it's kind of like you may be cool, but you'll never be like Johnny Cash eating a cake in a tree at 2 a.m., which is kind of messed up. But it's also like you'll never be as cool as Snoop Dogg hanging out in Martha Stewart's cookies, making like cookies at 3 a.m. Not to mention that Martha Stewart's more gangster than Snoop somehow, according to pop culture. Like that's like Snoop Dogg has attained a level of it's
well, dude, NCIS Los Angeles is still running.
Really?
Yeah, which is where I'm like, yeah, it's renewed for the 14th season.
God.
So that's what I mean. He's in a show that he was in it since 2009, and it's still fucking running. So it's like it's not. He found his niche.
Yeah,
it's not with like.
Oh no, that's audience. like Ice-T on Law and Order.
Yeah, exactly. Same type of deal where you're like, Ice-T should not. You wouldn't expect him to have been relevant as long as he has been, but that dude stayed relevant.
From
not. It's not like the most relevant, but he's still very relevant. Like in the sense of he's fucking TV cop like a motherfucker. Ironically,
yeah. Of all the people who would portray law enforcement, I never. And when I was younger, I never would have been like, yeah, Ice-T is totally going to become a cop on TV for like the rest of his life.
Yeah. You go to his Wikipedia page, years active, 1982 to present. Present. Not past, present.
Ice-T's got a 40-year career. That's hardcore.
Yeah, he's got shit.
That's so hardcore.
The voice of Pongo in Junkyard Dogs for 2023. That shit ain't even out yet.
Wait, I wonder what Ice Cube is doing.
Probably
making a kid movie.
He had the big three. I mean, it's still going. He has a basketball league now.
Oh.
Which he was saying some anti-Semitic shit about as to why they're not getting coverage, of course. Ice Cube is like
right, because the international consortium of Jewish people have concern over basketball. What the really? He wants to blame his basketball league's problems on other people. And that's like American as fuck. That's like straight out of the DT playbook.
Yep.
Oh, they didn't like it. They didn't like my alternative league, which was going to sap resources from their league. So they kept me out. So I'm going to run for freaking president and then try to publicly humiliate football. What a asshole! I don't even like football that much, but I think that's a dick move. It's like maybe your alternative league sucks and no one likes it. Because everyone's heavily invested in like the tribal nature of their current, fetishized sport. Yeah. Who has time to fetishize more than like one professional and one college team? That's like a full-time. That's a full-time fanatics, chore list right there.
But because of the quote unquote woke politics, maybe that's almost going to be gone too here soon. No more kneeling at my football games.
Exceptional Radio.
Exceptional Randos Show is produced live in Sunroom Studios' Base Capsule and in partnership with KLST 103.5, RadioCallisti.org. Remember to catch our Exceptional Randos live stream on YouTube every Sunday between 2 and 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And if you have a story, idea, or question that you would like to share, we want to hear from you. Thanks for listening.